How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, when feeling out of sight, for the ends of being and ideal grace. I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need, by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely, as men strive for right. I love thee purely, as they turn from praise. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs and in my childhood's faith. I love thee with a love I seemed to lose with my lost saints. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life. And if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death. The poem you just heard is from an originally private collection of love poems by Elizabeth Barrett Browning to her then husband-to-be, Robert Browning. This poem resonates with spirituality and follows the structure of what is known as a Petrarchan sonnet, comprising 14 lines broken up into an octave of 8 lines and a sestet of 6 lines. The rhyme scheme and bass meter of this poem are, to me, ambiguous, and I will leave that interpretation of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's intent as to the form of this poem to the professionals. I was newly attracted to her use, among other things, of enjambment, the running of a single thought from one line, couplet, or stanza to the next without a syntactical break. Owing especially to this reason, I think the rhythm of reading might vary depending on the reader and the reader's personal interpretation of the work. In the first octave, Barrett Browning explores the present situation or problem. Then, with the use of a volta or a turn, a solution or comment is made on the preceding octave or section. She takes a turn at the beginning of the sestet, where she expands her verse to explore the past and the future. The overall poem describes an all-encompassing love, which seems to defy and transcend time and space as it emerges from the mundane and understood into something whose proportions, while well-rooted in the everyday, eventually unfolds into a gravitational mass. With the use of spatial metaphor, Browning skillfully poses the quality of her love to depict a strong contrast between its own would-be normal, measurable aspects, then with its portrayal of having exceeded these normal measures. Her use of spatial metaphor also helps to scope and to express the tactile, physical dimensions and mass of her love in terms of depth and breadth and height. Upon suggesting that the body of her love can be enumerated in such a way, she adds more emphasis to the three-dimensionality and tactility of it with the use of polysyndeton. This is described as multiple use of a coordinating conjunction. In this case, her use of and many times. She then goes on to suggest that her love actually surpasses these methods and can, in fact, be better depicted on an even larger canvas, one that transcends into the spiritual realm, into the unknown reaches of the soul, revivifying its intensity. It's no attempt in any way on my part to depreciate Barrett's expression when I ask myself, who knows where the soul can reach? Considering the fact that the resonance of this love reaches us from her even today. The English Coach podcast takes my usual relaxed, accessible, human approach to your learning experience and, by definition, celebrates the virtues of diversity and inclusion, real people, real themes, and personalities from wherever you are. For this episode, the last for 2021, there is a little extra for you today. Feel free to visit the show notes page for this episode at www.englishcoachpodcast.com, where I have prepared and published, just for you, an even more authentic, non-scripted video filmed originally in studio and made with you in mind. It's just a little extra for the bigger fans that I will not be giving to YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook and Co. As an independent podcaster, it's important to me personally to resist being co-opted into anyone else's ads-driven paradigm and all the other stealthy violations of your privacy and mine. That has never been my game, and I do have a duty of care to protect the integrity of my own content. You are, of course, free to listen, follow, or subscribe to the show from anywhere you like to listen to podcasts. It's everywhere. On the official show page, however, you can enjoy all my content ad-free the way it was meant to be. So then, without further ado, on with the show. I can also note that Barrett Browning uses something called anaphora, which is in this case the repetition of I love thee almost 9 times. This does not come across in any way, though, as if she is trying to convince herself of her own love, but as skillful articulation of what is to her familiar conviction. The word thee is an old form of you, which perhaps wasn't even used in her time anymore. However, she chose to use it nonetheless for nostalgic reasons, I suppose. The words soul, being, grace, faith, saint, God, and death help to add that distinct spiritual quality to this work. I'm not entirely sure if the question with which the poem begins introduces the profound answer to a question actually asked by her then love interest, or a rhetorical question simply arising out of self-reflection. What I do know is that this poem was written as part of a private collection and was actually originally hidden from even her love interest at the time. The line in the poem which says, "When feeling out of sight for the ends of being an ideal grace," this line is a little beyond me and I can only sense the meaning. She wishes, I suspect, to evoke a real feeling, one I suspect characterized by a note of perpetual yearning for an ever-vanishing but very real horizon, a leisurely, joyous longing of sorts for a perfect, perhaps unreal ideal. Her very real love is portrayed here as not only spanning the space between that with which we are present, but also reaching into and beyond the ends that lie fleeting and persistently distanced, as though almost outside of peripheral view. Now, let's bear in mind that this poem might have originally been meant to be a private, personal, reflective. I have no idea if she intended to give it to anyone, though at some point they agreed together that the works deserved to be published. I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need, by sun and candlelight. Now, this is a good example of what I referred to earlier as enjambment. Yeah, that's actually originally a French word. I have no idea how to pronounce it in French. You could say it's a single thought that bridges multiple lines and depicts her love as a thing that, in an understood and unspoken way even, envelops all the phases of the day, literally every typical day, and all night. I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as they turn from praise. To me speaks to the resoluteness of her love, though surrounded by noise. The noise of others who perhaps don't know what she knows, and the noise as they try to articulate and even seek to evangelize with their own truths and ideals and disenchantments, and with praise to their own idols and their own ends or purposes. It could also mean that she compares her love with the conviction with which people generally try to do the right thing in life. It could also mean that she loves one person and remains resolute in spite of all the attentions she might have been receiving from other men who strive for rights to her affections and rights over her life. I don't know what it means. It's a little bit heavy, and at best we should leave that interpretation to whoever is reading it. I gave 3 possibilities there. When Elizabeth speaks of passion in old griefs and childhood's faith, I think she likens the intensity of her feeling to that of past pain and the pure innocence of childhood, the childhood imagination and beliefs. In the same breath, she appears to speak of a similar intensity associated with a sense of loss she felt when those more childlike worldviews, as they related to saintly figures in her life, eventually matured. The last 3 lines of the poem start with a fairly grounded comparison with common expressions of emotion marked by smiles and tears. She ends the poem, however, with a promise that for her, God willing, this love will continue to unfold even after death. Now, proper analysis of this poem takes time and could very well follow Barrett's love into the beyond. So we'll just keep it at that, although of course there are many more facets to this poem. Not only more literary device, but also other facets having to do with her somewhat unique history. Now, as flowery and emotional as this work might have come across, this is not exactly the work of a lightweight. Barrett Browning was the daughter and granddaughter of Jamaican slave owners. Being herself of mixed heritage, that aspect of her formative years, coupled with the then intrinsic attachments of state-sanctioned subjugation, disenfranchisement, and violence of all forms against the people, is of course echoed strongly in her work. Poignant political sensitivities, also born of personal experience, informed her work. The well-nurtured skill set of her tyrannical father wielded the same whip of oppression on his own children. According to historical accounts, he didn't want any of them to get married. In addition to that, being a woman in the 1800s, and owing to the critically political weight of her body of works, it wasn't exactly the easiest thing to express her literature meaningfully and to get published back in the day. While her siblings managed slave plantations in Jamaica, she educated herself in England and eventually had to elope to get away from the tyranny of her slave father and marry her then love interest in Italy. She is said to have been in turn disinherited of the family fortune. Her entire life, sensitivities, and expressions were plagued and enriched by pain, compromise, and tragedy. She endured what I imagine to have been a splintered existence between the legacy of slavery that fed her and what she knew for herself to be right and that which was intrinsically wrong. She did suffer some ailments and some accidents, I think from a spinal injury, mounting a pony or something like that. As a result of these, she's sadly reputed to also have been addicted to morphine, which also might have had some influence on her sensory perceptions at the time. Barrett Browning is also said to have been in large part self-taught, though she did have significant mentors in her career as a poet. Barrett Browning went on to become even more radicalized and is said to have significantly influenced British popular political thought on issues such as the Italian reunification, the rights of women, and the abolition of slavery. She was also obviously more of an abolitionist persuasion, as evidenced by her works, A Curse for a Nation, in which even the angels sound resolutely wicked, and The Runaway Slave at Pilgrim's Point. In this particular piece, she reflects on and converses with the very controversial realms of infanticide by a mother committed against a child born of rape by a slave owner, and his eventual murder of her, the mother, and all with a certain empathy. Very dark indeed. Transcripts and further readings linked in the show notes. So then, there we have it. Episode 61, the final episode for 2021, and my small contribution to the ongoing poetry series. She had a good sense of contrast, this Barrett Browning, and if I were to meet the woman in the spirit somewhere in the void, I'd love to talk to her about black and white photography, among other things, of course. Truth be told, I was first introduced to this poem at a very young age. I actually had no idea about Barrett Browning's rich Jamaican heritage when I first voiced it on December 8th for this episode as my contribution to the poetry series today, 3 weeks later. I'm very glad to have started with this one. Epic verse, born of blood and contradiction. With a small win is always a good way to begin. Now again, this is not a formal lesson, it's a show. But if you are interested in signing up for lessons, group coaching, in supporting the show generally, or in simply getting involved, just do it direct. And feel free to head on over to www.englishcoachpodcast.com. Like it if you like it, and if you don't, lie to me. Share the show with a friend, or if you like it a lot, keep it all to yourself and simply sign up to join my private listeners group. The English Coach Podcast is freely available and free from anywhere you listen to podcasts. So then, until next time, bye for now.